Hey everyone, welcome to episode 11 of Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete, the show where we're pretty much trying to talk to anyone and everyone involved in the Microsoft and Azure clouds. I'm Rue of Rue and Pete. I'm joined with Pete. Pete, how are you?
Hey Rue, I'm grand. Warm, but hanging in there. How are you today, my friend?
Yeah, all good. Yep, it's such a British conversation to talk about the weather, isn't it? But
It really
obviously,
is.
yep, and I've got the, again, privilege of introducing today's guest, Thijs Lecomte. Hopefully I've not butchered that pronunciation. Can correct me if I got it wrong. He's a Microsoft MVP in enterprise mobility and also a senior Microsoft 365 consultant for the Collective Consultancy over in Belgium. That is such a prestigious company. When I look at the list of folks that work for the Collective, it's so impressive. And he focuses on security, client management, and automation, runs his own blog, which we'll link to in the show notes, and is also, quite impressively, the technical editor of the awesome Microsoft 365 Security for IT Pros, which is an ebook, gets updated monthly. It focuses on the Microsoft 365 Security Stack and is due its 2022 edition quite soon. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. It's funny because every time I like talking to Microsoft support or somebody from the product team, also always the first question is, how do we pronounce your name? Because it's really hard. I think the nouns maybe is really difficult for somebody English speaking.
Yes.
So it's Thijs Lecomte. Thijs is actually a Dutch name, and then Lecomte is French. Because in Belgium we have 3 different languages throughout the country, so we pick and choose sometimes.
Excellent, good stuff. No, I have the same problem with my name because on social media I abbreviate it to just Rue, but the full name is Ruri, which has about 17 vowels in it, and it's Gaelic, and it freaks people out. It looks a bit like a password, so I just stick with Rue and I keep it simple. So yeah, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I guess Pete, if you want to kick us off, I know that you were interested in kind of prying into the authorship, being an author yourself, obviously.
I am indeed. Yeah, welcome, Thijs. It's really great to speak to you again, and we've spoke a lot lately at Teams Nation, and you've been a very welcome speaker on the M365 Security and Compliance user group that I run with Al. So talked to you a lot lately, but which is great. So we first came across your work, though, as Rue has already alluded to, with the M365 Security for IT Pros book, which covers all manner of things from the Defender to Intune. Can you tell us how the idea for the book came about, how you found the experience and the ongoing experience of it, and how you found editing it in general?
Yep. So the book was actually founded by Michael van Horenbeek, which is also an Azure MVP here in Belgium, and also my boss. So that's why I know him. And Michael has been on the Office 365 for IT Pro book a couple of years ago. So we actually authored I think it was the Exchange and maybe the Hybrid Exchange chapters as well. But then due to other work responsibilities, he had to fall off. But it always interested him because, as you both know, Office 365, Microsoft 365 is ever evolving. If you want to keep up, you have to be on top of things. And that's where the idea for the book came in, because the last couple of years, Microsoft have really made a boom inside of the security market. A couple of years ago, you would think Microsoft Defender, okay, let's install a free third-party application such as McAfee on top of it. That has completely overturned the last couple of years. And we in the company see big focus on security as well. But it's also really difficult to find the correct information because you have to use different places to find that correct information, also bundled with tips and tricks, and also up-to-date information. Because the big downside, of course, of printing a book is it gets out of date the moment you print it. New updates immediately afterwards. So that's why the ebook came into place. And so right now, we have a couple of authors. So we have Michael, who is the lead author and is authoring the Microsoft Defender and the Cloud App Security chapters. Then we have Peter Daalmans. He is a Intune MVP. He creates the Intune and the Azure AD chapters. And then we have Damien. I'm gonna butcher his last name, so I'm not gonna try it. But Damien is a Exchange MVP, and he is working on the Exchange Security and then the Office ATP chapter. So it's a great team to have. I came into the book, I think, about half a year before we first published. Michael came with the to me because I'm pretty all around. I'm not focusing on only Intune, but also doing security and automation. So that's why Michael thought I was a great fit to be the technical editor. And it's amazing to do. I really love it. It's a lot of work because it's each month, of course. You have to do it each month continuously. But it's so awesome to work with all these awesome authors. They have been MVPs for so many years and they have so much knowledge. So it's awesome to share. And I try to be, so as a technical editor, my job is to, of course, that everything is technically correct. For example, if there's code in the book, I have to test the code, validate the code, but also every nitty-gritty detail has to be validated and checked. Is this correct? Is this not correct? And most of the authors are, of course, experts in this. That's no problem. But the main focus from my side then is going over the different chapters, because each author has their own chapter, but it's one book. A reader has to read it as one book, not as different books combined to each other. So that's why Mike and I are also focusing on combining each and one of those.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the changes that you're seeing on a month-to-month basis, do they tend to be fairly minor as a rule, or does it involve much of a rewrite? I mean, we all know how Microsoft like to change things, new versions of PowerShell and new commandlets and new things in the admin centers is what I found in writing my own book. And I've only had to. I'm beginning to update my MS500 book only once so far. Looking at it again shortly. I can't imagine doing it on a monthly basis. The challenge of that must be incredible.
Yes. So the easiest thing, of course, is everything that's announced, because you can look there and see in the blogs what's announced. But then, like you said, Peter, you have PowerShell commandlets changing, the admin center having a different look and feel. So that's challenging. But I think the most challenging we have found are really the big product updates. For example, we used to have Microsoft Threat Protection, and then Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, all in the same portal. And then suddenly, of course, as MVPs, we knew it was coming, but suddenly, boom, everything is in one portal. It's all internet connected. So it's not as easy as just picking out the screenshots and just changing everything, because some of the content has to change chapter and then it doesn't fit in a chapter. We have to refactor it. So these really big updates are a hassle to work with. But that's also the fun side of things, of course, because you investigate also all the new things that are coming out, and you spend time with these. So, so go ahead, Peter.
And with it being an online book only, there isn't a print copy, is there? I'm right in saying, is it online only?
Online only, yeah. We have an ebook format and a PDF format. We thought about printing it, but it's just, I think, the value of the book is having it up to date with the monthly updates. So, yeah,
that's the advantage of having that online, being able to update it so much easier. The print copies are sort of almost dead on arrival, which is how I kind of feel about my books in a sense. So, but I do like having that physical copy still. But we do hear that the 2022 edition, is that right? Is on the horizon though, coming out soon. What sort of new? Can you give us any sort of exclusives of new stuff we might be able to expect in the book? Anything exciting?
So we're currently working on it heavily. That's also one of the difficulties, of course, because we have to maintain the monthly updates while still pushing out the big release. So we have to make sure both get enough love. So the book was first released on July. And normally an edition has a year-long life cycle. But the second month, unfortunately, we missed updating the book once. We didn't publish an update, so we'll give a free month to everybody who subscribed. So the 2022 edition will come out in August. We're currently working on that. What I do love, and that's I think a sneak peek that hasn't really been announced, is that there will be an Azure Sentinel chapter in there,
Yes.
which is
Nice.
something I'm writing. So I'm currently heavily on the work on that to enable Azure Security, Azure Sentinel as a separate chapter in the book.
Great.
Fantastic. You're absolutely the right person to be taking on that chapter. So, and there's one final question on the book, sorry, Roo, that I'm interested in. Is the book purely from a security standpoint, or is there any compliance stuff in there as well?
Yeah, so right now we're focusing on security, but we have some work going on inside of the compliance piece as well, and more importantly, in Microsoft information protection. This is something we're working on at the moment, but I don't know if it will fully make the 2022 edition or it will be pushed out on a later date. But that's, of course, also it's difficult to know what content will we include, because on one hand you want to keep it small and also make sure readers will not have an overload of information, but it has to be enough of also. Like example, Azure Sentinel, is it Microsoft 365 Security? Well, not at first. It's Genesis resource, but if you're talking about Microsoft 365 Security, you cannot go beyond Azure Sentinel. You have to schedule it. You have to talk about it because it's such a huge part in the Microsoft security stack.
Yeah, for sure. Can't wait for that chapter. I do really want to read that more into Sentinel, especially if it's written by yourself. That'll be a really good addition, I think. So the 2022 version is a day one purchase for me anyway.
Awesome.
And I guess, if I'm thinking about it a little bit more, you mentioned you're kind of a generalist insofar as you know a lot about everything across 365. You must learn a lot just going through the editing process and seeing what the other authors have contributed. How do I even approach this question? How do you learn it all? Because 365 is so massive and there's so much to learn. How do you kind of filter out the noise and make sure you're focusing on the important stuff?
I don't think I have fully mastered it yet, to be honest, because like you said, it's so huge. I do have some focus points, of course. So for example, the compliance piece, the Microsoft information protection, that's something that I do not fully possess as a skill yet. So when that chapter comes around, I will have to study it first and then edit the chapter. But it's indeed a huge overload of information, but luckily we have such a great authors who are also very knowledgeable about it. So what I mostly do is all of the things that are being added to the book, I have read about before. And then the authors just go a little bit deeper into it. And that deeper information, most of the times I know it already, but oftentimes also I have to double check things. I have to look into these. So it's a difficult thing to manage because, like you said, so much information.
Yeah. And, it is funny because, even if we think about the exams and the way folks describe themselves, and I probably include myself here, is security and compliance seem to be quite intertwined within Microsoft 365. Folks consider themselves security and compliance specialists and things like that. How do you, as a technical editor, approach what to include in the book insofar as this is really more compliance than security? I'm thinking of things such as, retention labels and things like that, because again, it kind of, there's crossover there.
Yeah, and I don't think we have like a guideline of this will get into the book, this will not get into book. It mostly also depends on we as the editing team. If something we really like, does it bring value to the book? And is it really, for example, something new? Maybe things like retention. It has been inside of Exchange, for example, a couple of years. I don't know how much, but it was an on-prem Exchange for a while. So that has been in the book for a while. So we will try to focus also on the newest things, the newest toys to work with within the Microsoft 365 environment. Because I think that's also what the readers want to talk about, what they want to read about, what they want to know about is the newest things within the security and compliance stack.
Awesome. Good stuff. So what we'll do is we'll link to to the book on Gumtree, I think it is you guys published that on. So we'll link to that in the show notes so that everyone can pick it up. And, I guess if I kind of prod into a little bit more about your writing, really, and as far as your blog, I have about 1,000 Firefox tabs, and maybe 20 of those are your blog, where it's stuff I need to get back to and check out. But one of the ones that really caught my eye recently was a blog on kind of cloud-based automation, and as far as you were comparing Power Automate to Logic Apps. Now, to the beginner who's looking into automation within 365, there's a lot of crossover, a lot of things that look the same, have very similar names. It's kind of confusing. Where should folks get started, and when should they use what tool and when?
Yeah, so that's a really topic that's close to my heart, because I have an opinion about it. And if you read the blog, you know my opinion about some of the automation tools within the stack. And I think each of them have a use, and you have to use them to their strengths, but the different use cases are not always at apparent. So for example, if we take Power Automate and Azure Logic Apps, they're essentially the same. You pick up connectors, you create actions, and you build Lego as a code. It's as simple as that. And you could say, okay, they're the same, and I can use either or. But what I saw before I wrote that blog was so many people were building business processes, like behind the scenes IT automation inside of Power Automate. But that's not really what Power Automate is built for. For example, I think Sally Hansen has some great Power Automate examples to do automation within Teams. And for example, if you click a button on your phone, it will go into Do Not Disturb in your Teams, and it will create an out of office and these kind of things. So I think Power Automate is really built for automating things from a user perspective. A simple example, if you receive an email with an attachment, okay, save the attachments within OneDrive. That's an easy example, because Power Automate is also always bound to a user. It's always inside of the user context. Okay, you can share it with multiple people, but if you have, like, for example, a really business critical Power Automate flow, and the user that is associated with a service account or a generic user is removed, you also remove that Power Automate flow.
Right.
And this is, I think, where Logic Apps come in, because Logic Apps are an Azure resource. You have to delete the entire subscription before the Logic App is removed. And then when we're talking about access control, about costs, but also about logging, these are things that Azure Logic Apps really improve some of the things that Power Automate is lacking, in my opinion.
And does Azure, do the Logic Apps, do they focus on mainly or purely the user context as well, or is that fair to say? Or?
No, so I think these indeed also have a more bigger focus on backend infrastructure, for example, connections to Oracle databases or Azure backends. So you have connectors within both Power Automate and Logic Apps, and connectors contain a connection to a product, and most of these connectors are shared between the two. So most of the things you will find within Logic Apps, you can also do with Power Automate. So while they each have their use cases, you can mostly do the same things with both products.
Right. Fantastic. So is it fair to say then that Power Automate should be used if I'm end user and I want to achieve something that is maybe more specific to what I'm doing day to day, less affected to the larger organization? If I'm a back-end engineer, IT professional, and I want to automate things that kind of happen in my infrastructure or my SaaS, that's when I want to use Logic Apps. Is that correct?
Yes, so that's my opinion. But even within the Microsoft security stack, to give you an example, if you're within Microsoft Cloud App Security, you can automate the response to an alert.
Sure. Yeah.
That alert is done through a playbook. Guess what is behind that playbook? It's Power Automate, not Logic Apps. That's something I really get confused about. Like, Microsoft, what are you doing? But I agree with you, Roo. That's the opinion I have about it.
Right. Okay. And
But of
yes,
course, sorry,
so
go ahead.
you mentioned how that seems to be the way that you would recommend it anyway. However, there's a little bit of inconsistency there. MCAS suggests maybe do it using Flow, Power Automate. Is there an official position on Microsoft? I mean, if you were to go to Microsoft and say, which tool should I use? How do they recommend folks make that decision?
There is, I think, a blog on it, or an official tech community docs even, that talk about the differences between the two. And I think they take the same stance.
Right.
So Power Automate is more built for user automation, and Azure Logic Apps is more for your IT professional trying to automate some tasks. Previously, would do that. Maybe you could compare Logic Apps as the scheduled task from previous times, and Power Automate is maybe a VB script you would run on the local desktop of a user.
Nice. That's a good analogy insofar as what's the risk, insofar as one's maybe easier to manage for an administrator. Good stuff. And I guess, just to further complicate things, Logic Apps, that's presumably as an Azure resource. Will that cost folks more insofar as do they have to pay per usage? Because this is Microsoft at the end of the day.
Yeah, so Power Automate, you have two kind of licenses. You have, I think, the free license or the standard license, which is included, and then you have the premium license. And that premium license is based on specific connectors. So, for example, if you would like to connect to, gonna say something wrong probably, an Azure Key Vault, that's a premium license. And that premium license is actually pretty expensive. While Azure Logic Apps is indeed built per use, I think it's per second or per minute that's being executed.
Right.
But the cost is never that big. To give you an example, we in the collective, we have a SOC built on Azure Sentinel, and all of the incidents created inside of Azure Sentinel for our customers, we use Logic Apps to synchronize to our Jira ITSM tool. So that's continuously executing multiple Logic Apps between each other. I don't think the cost for that is even €5 a month.
Right. Okay.
And for those who might not know, what does a SOC stand for?
Security Operations Center. So it's something to handle all of the alerts, the incidents coming in from an environment, and making sure the environment is safe.
Fantastic. Now, this is really interesting stuff. I mean, Azure, pure Azure, as opposed to the version of, Azure Active Directory that Rue and I work with a lot, are two very, very different animals. And especially when it pertains to the licensing, the licensing in M365 and Azure Active Directory can be complicated, but compared to the messy situations you seemingly can get into with pure Azure, it seems like you really have to know your stuff and really be on the ball. I mean, an example that I came across recently where the two sort of meshed together was, I've played a lot with SharePoint Syntax, and one of the models that you can use with SharePoint Syntax is forms processing models, which uses AI Builder credits in Azure and aspects of Power Automate, and you've got to be very careful with your spend. So I think that's probably something you tell your customers a lot with things like that, and things like Sentinel. Just watch your spend, because it's very, very easy in Azure to spend a lot of money.
Yeah, and that's maybe some of the downside of Azure as well, because with Microsoft 365, you buy the license, you know the price beforehand, you know, okay, my user growth will be 10% within the year. But with Azure, it's sometimes really difficult to estimate what the costing will be. So that can be really a hassle to explain to a customer as well. You cannot say it will cost you €100, because if suddenly usage increases because reason X, Y, Z, or Microsoft makes a change, it could be 200 the same month. So that's indeed a hassle that a lot of customers are struggling with. And like you say, the difference between the Microsoft 365 world and the Azure world, they seem to be really small, but some of the changes are really big and not that known to most people. What I come across a lot is the RBAC between Microsoft 365 Defender and Azure. Customers are saying, I activated my global administrator, why can't I manage these resources? Well, it's completely separate. There's no connection between the two of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's indeed something Microsoft could improve upon.
Completely. I know what you're saying, and for the benefit of anyone who might not know, RBAC is called role-based access control, isn't it? And yeah, I had another example of this that I was looking at just the other day in looking at the compliance center, and in the compliance center for M365, there are Azure AD roles in there, and there are pure compliance roles in there as well, and it can be so confusing. Well, which one is going to affect what? And you can go on a real journey with a customer sometimes when you're engaging with them and getting them into their M365 journey. And 1 minute you're in Teams and SharePoint, and before you know it, you're talking Power Automate, and then you're into Azure credits, and they all link together. And to use another analogy, I always go back to the box of Lego. You've got a big box of Lego bricks with M365 and Azure, and what you build is going to depend on what you need. And no two organizations are going to build the same thing or use all the bricks. Every environment's going to be unique. So, but that's the beauty of it, isn't it? You can make what you need. So and so
exactly.
cool.
But that's indeed, I think, the struggle of a lot of consultants as well. Because you come into a customer and they want to ask questions about, for example, Microsoft Defender for endpoints, and then they're deploying it with Intune, and suddenly you have to be an Intune expert. And when you're talking about Intune, you have to know Azure AD, and it's all interconnected. You cannot know it all, but you have to know it all. So it's a really difficult balance.
Because the customer sees a consultant, and to them, you are the expert. You should know it all. So, but it's not that simple. There are so many specialties and subspecialties. So SMEs, subject matter expert, is a term we're hearing more and more. And there are so many SME areas that you can get into in M365. Nobody's an M365 or Azure generalist anymore because it's impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but improbable. And if you do know everything, then you're a very, very clever person indeed.
No, indeed, because it's funny you said it, because a couple of years ago I changed jobs from a generic consulting company to the collective, which is cloud only. And they were talking about, are you going to specialize in Microsoft Cloud? Are you crazy? That's so tiny, but if you look back to it, it's so big, you cannot specialize in the Microsoft Cloud.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you just obviously I focus on the 365 side of things, but even if you look at 365 over the last 5 years, it's just added feature after feature. It's moved from Office 365 to Microsoft 365. And all it takes is for you to look at the list of products and services under Azure, and it just balloons, and who knows what half of them even do. And AWS, quite frankly, faces the same problem. Although the naming conventions don't help, as far as it's not exactly obvious what a lot of stuff does just by the name of it. One of the things that is maybe I'm going to make a nice segue here. One of the things that maybe is a bit more obvious is Azure Automation. And again, we're just going to hammer down into this automation stuff. So we've discussed Logic Apps, we've discussed Power Automate, Azure Automation, another service that's in Azure. How does that fit into what we've already discussed?
Yeah, and so if you're talking about Azure Automation, you also have Azure Functions, which is also immediately taken into effect. So mostly when a customer talks about, I want to automate something within Azure, I choose between Logic Apps, Azure Automation, and Azure Functions. Power Automate is immediately off the table for me for Azure Automation. So it's really between those three. Then the choice for me between Logic Apps and the other two are simple, because Logic Apps is basic coding. If you do want to do complex things with arrays and filtering and really go deep inside of code, and you cannot do that within Logic Apps. Logic Apps is great to, by default, connect to resources without having to create your own API calls. But if you're going to do advanced scripts, you have to go to Azure Functions and Azure Automation. And the choice between those two is not always apparent as well, because there are benefits between the two of them. And it's really, if you pick one, you lose something with the other. So it's a hassle.
Right. Okay. And I guess, I don't want to delve into too much detail here, but at a high level, why would you choose one over the other? So, for example, I know that you've worked with cloud app security and synchronizing trusted IP addresses from AAD, I guess, into cloud app security, and you approach that, I think, using Azure Automate. Why did you choose that one, for example?
Well, to be honest, at that point, I didn't really think about Azure Functions, to be honest. So this is also something I'm learning as I go, as to what is the best product between each other. Azure Automation, for a purely consultancy guy, not a developer, more an infrastructure kind of guy, Azure Automation is the direct choice you're going to make. Because it's just easy. It's only PowerShell. You can choose a module. You can import it. It's really convenient. But then Azure Functions has some great possibilities. Easy integration with Azure Key Vaults for your passwords. You can secure it. You can also integrate it with VNets, which is also possible with Azure Automation. So when I go about automating tasks now, I mostly go to Azure Functions, just because it seems to be a little bit scalable, and also better integration with the rest of the Azure security stack.
Cool. And sticking with automation, much of that is powered by the Microsoft Graph API. So API can be a daunting and scary term for IT professionals. I know it certainly is for me. I don't really understand it terribly well, I'm going to admit. Hold my hands up. So can you share with us, explain to us what exactly is the Graph API and why is it important to understand? Okay,
yeah. So the Microsoft Graph API is an API that's used throughout the Microsoft 365 stack. And it's the API that you can use to automate almost everything with that's Microsoft 365 stack. So before, all of the automation on premises was based on instead of PowerShell, but mostly PowerShell is calling on-premises resources. And now more and more is being switched to web-based APIs. I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to try to explain APIs.
Yeah. So I was going to say, who needs to use them? Is it purely for developers? I mean, or is it more than that? Do you think it's more and more people will be using this?
I think as a non-developer infrastructure kind of guy, we're almost focusing always on PowerShell. Please, to God, is there a PowerShell module available for this?
Yeah.
Because that's the easiest way.
Completely.
But I think, for example, for Microsoft, they first built the Graph API because most of the portals are also based on the Graph API. And then afterwards, they built the PowerShell modules.
Right.
But if you want to do everything with the new tools, with the new toys you wanna play with, you have to use Graph API. So I think almost all of us as infrastructure kind of guys, we have to start using the Graph API if we're serious about automation.
Yep. And even, obviously you can invoke APIs using PowerShell as well, I guess, and for example, I know that a lot of the Intune scripts that the guys at Microsoft publish, they're fundamentally using PowerShell commands to then invoke the APIs. But that's an interesting takeaway that you mentioned insofar as when the services are being developed, it's done as an API first, and then the PowerShell comes second. Whereas historically, maybe it's been the opposite. If we think back to, PowerShell really started as a way of managing Exchange. It was PowerShell first, and then the GUI second, as an example. So, I mean, I guess that's, it's something that I think every 5-10 years, there is a shift in where IT professionals need to focus their learning, and APIs seems to me to be that area at the minute, insofar as if you want to be on the cutting edge, that's where you need to start. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I completely agree, because I think about 5 years ago, the switch was between should I use PowerShell or should I use the GUI? That was a difficult choice for a lot of IT professionals. But then, of course, if you want to do quick things or want to do things in bulk, you have to use PowerShell. So the switch to PowerShell and automation was on pretty quickly. But indeed, now APIs are so apparent. You talked about the Microsoft scripts. I think they have a lot of scripts on Intune. If you want to automate things within Intune, you have to use the Graph API almost. Same with Azure Sentinel. There's also an API for it, and the PowerShell module is always behind.
Yeah.
What I even like to do sometimes, I did it last week with a colleague who are trying to automate some things in Intune. We couldn't find an API for it. Well, you could just open the portal, click F12 to open developer tools, and just trace the API calls there, and you can easily manage it yourself. You cannot do that with PowerShell.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. That's a good way to check stuff. I've seen things like that as far as folks will, they'll jump on an application page within Intune and then hit into the developer tools, and they'll be able to pull, the IDs and things of apps and stuff like that. That's all good. And you mentioned Sentinel there as an area that if you want to automate things, you're going to be looking towards APIs. At Teams Nation just the other month, you were presenting about Sentinel. Where, Sentinel's a reasonably new product. It's a Siemens SOAR, which, acronyms and all that kind of stuff. Why should people be interested in Sentinel? It's coming up in the next version of the book. Why should we care about it?
Well, I think it stems from the fact do you care about security? Because of course, if you do not care, if you're not a security-minded person, you should not care about Sentinel. Okay, you should, but you will not. But within the Microsoft 365 security stack, Microsoft is always saying it's an integrated product. You can do it from one portal. It's really easy. I think all of us here know it's not that easy. It's not one portal. It's not all that integrated. And Azure Sentinel just allows you to have a single pane of glass with every incident, every alert coming from all of the different Microsoft security products. So setting that up it's really easy. It can be done in so little time, but it provides so much value because you do not have to look into every different portal.
Right. And I guess, sorry to cut you off there, Pete, but if I'm just thinking about this a little bit more, we've got the new security portal, I guess you could call it, which is consolidated into Microsoft 365 Defender. We've got Cloud App Security, which is pulling logs from log connectors and SaaS applications. What scale should I decide, okay, well, this isn't enough. Now I need to start looking at Sentinel?
Well, I think if you're already using things like Cloud App Security, Microsoft Defender, you should be using Azure Sentinel, because to give you an example, identity protection provides great insights. It's not in the security portal. It's not in there. It's not part of the Microsoft 365 security stack. So in order to have a single pane of glass of everything, you have to use it. As well, again, coming back to automation, if you want to do automated tasks based on your incidents and alerts, it's so convenient to do with Azure Sentinel. But if you go further and expand the Azure Sentinel, so I think it's a no-brainer to put all of your Microsoft data inside of Azure Sentinel. The cost is so little because Microsoft gives a lot for free. I think we and the collective, as a 15-person company, we pay 20 euros per month for Sentinel.
Oh, wow.
It's not something you should worry about. But besides that, besides just the log aggregator for Microsoft Cloud products, it's just so easy to integrate third-party solutions. For example, a lot of customers running Zscaler, which enables you to protect your internet traffic. If you're investigating an alert from Microsoft Defender and you see a connection to a malicious IP, it's not blocked by Microsoft Defender, but it could be blocked by Zscaler. So if you have to go to Zscaler, pull up the logs, run a query there, it's easy to do it from Azure Sentinel with one query.
Right, okay, so if we're wanting to query from third-party audit logs and it's not integrated with something like Cloud App Security, folks should really be looking into Sentinel. Yeah,
I think so, because it's all integrated. That's the beauty of a SIEM. You can query across your entire estate and provide a way of, okay, for example, where is the attacker? Is he on premises? Is he in SaaS applications? Is he in Microsoft 365? This is something Azure Sentinel can provide.
And how mature do you think something like Sentinel is compared to some of the third-party SIEM tools out there, like Splunk, for example, just to pick one out of the hat?
Yeah, so I think Sentinel was first announced or first public previewed in 2019. So we're 2 years along almost at the moment. I think there's some basic capabilities that Azure Sentinel does not have and should have. To give you an example, um, if you want to pull in logs from a third-party source, you can set that source to push all the logs to Azure Sentinel, but you cannot filter that data from the Azure Sentinel side. So if you would say I only like 1% of those logs, you have to do it at the source, not at the destination, which is Azure Sentinel.
Right.
And I know a lot of other SIEM products support this, but what I have seen with Azure Sentinel is the speed at how they evolve. I think I will have a big challenge updating the Azure Sentinel chapter because so much is happening. Each month, 30 new data connectors being announced, new features in Azure Sentinel, investigations. There's so much being done with Azure Sentinel. I think it's a really strong focus from Microsoft as well. They might not have feature parity with something like Splunk, but I think they have some benefits compared to Splunk, and they're really catching up quickly.
And Microsoft always get there, don't they? Sometimes they are a little bit behind the game, but they always catch up, either by developing their own products or by acquisition and incorporating that into things like Sentinel. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the coming weeks, months, and years even. But it's an awesome product, and I very much enjoyed your talk that you did for us at the Security and Compliance User Group, and also Teams Nation. So if you're watching this, the Teams Nation videos have just been released today on their YouTube channel, actually. So a little plug there. Go and check out Thijs' session on Sentinel. It's really cool, and you'll get much more of an understanding on that. So fantastic. One other question, changing tack very, very slightly. How are you finding passwordless in Azure AD? So you've been using it for over a year now. What would you say are the good and the bad points of passwordless technologies?
Yeah, so I think I love the idea for myself. Within the SOC that we have for our customers, so many phishing attacks, so many people printing out passwords, pushing them in everywhere they can. Passwords are, I think Microsoft has some data on it. It's like 90% of breaches are because of passwords, some or even more. I don't know. So I love the idea. It's just completely remove passwords. This can be done a couple of ways, of course. Sorry, Peter, thought you were going to say something.
No, I was just agreeing with you. No, go ahead, please.
So a couple of ways to do passwordless. One is Windows Hello for Business, facial recognition or a fingerprint verification only on Windows 10 devices. Then we have the FIDO2 keys, which are USB keys or NFC keys, which can enable you to do passwordless sign-in. And then the last one is the Microsoft Authenticator, where that's when you fill in your email address within the portal, it will provide a 2-digit code. And then you will see the prompts on your Authenticator app. You will see 3 different numbers, and you have to pick the number that corresponds to the portal. These are 3 things Microsoft is focusing on. But I think the downside is those are 3 different things. For an end user, it's almost impossible to know, should I use FIDO2 now? Should I use Authenticator? Is Windows Hello for Business enabled? So I love the idea, and they have been on this journey for a while. And I love it myself because we are a small company. We have started 2 years ago. So we are a cloud-only company. So it's really easy for us to implement passwordless almost everywhere. But for regular companies who have so many legacy dragging behind them, it's almost impossible to implement at the moment.
Yeah, so much easier being cloud only, isn't it? When you hybrid infrastructure, it is more difficult. And I agree with you, Thijs, that those 3 numbers that you get as one of the authentication methods, I have that on my own Outlook.com personal account, and I'm absolutely loving that. I think that's such a great way of authenticating and taking those awful passwords out of the equation, because users are, for rightly or wrongly, they're never going to listen to IT professionals about secure passwords and not using the same passwords. And so we just need to take the problem away and then replace it with something better. Absolutely agree.
Yep, exactly. And I'm really interested in how far Microsoft and how fast they're going to push it through. Because passwordless at the moment, for example, you talked about the Authenticator app. It's a great way to log in also with your work account. But then if you try to use PowerShell, for example, and connect to Azure AD through PowerShell, it does not support passwordless authentication. Right. So that's a hassle. But I know, for example, I think it was yesterday, somebody from the product team from Azure AD asked, what are the current issues with passwordless, and help us improve it. So I think it's a really big focus point currently for Microsoft as well.
Yeah, and last time I checked, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but if you had multiple Azure AD accounts in the Authenticator, last time I checked, you could only actually use one of those for passwordless, which, not ideal, but like you said, they're pushing forward with it. They're full steam ahead. It's clearly the direction they want everyone to head up. And, I think you're spot on insofar as, you've got these 3 different ways of managing passwordless, and it's a bit confusing. It's confusing enough for IT professionals, never mind the end user. Windows Hello for Business to me is always an interesting one insofar as when I'm having that discussion with conversations, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between Microsoft's vision for Windows Hello for Business and the consumer's vision for Windows Hello for Business. So for example, I've worked with customers who are they're using Duo for MFA, and now they want to use Azure MFA. But one of the things they love about Duo is they can install an agent on the PC and they can get multi-factor at the point of Windows 10 login. And Microsoft's primary response to that is Windows Hello for Business. And they make the argument that the TPM chip, which resides in the device, that counts as a factor for authentication. And then, of course, we've always got this consideration that, by default, anyway, a PIN is going to be supported as a method for authentication.
Yep.
That's vulnerable to shoulder surfing and things like that. And I think they've, I believe they've got multi-factor unlock as a kind of way of reinforcing it, making it a little bit more secure. But I guess a lot of folks, what I'm saying here is they have concerns about Windows Hello for Business insofar as out the box, I'm scared of putting in 4-digit PIN because that's easier for someone to kind of steal and then punch in. How do you approach Windows Hello for Business? Is it something that you guys use at the collective for your passwordless kind of estate?
Yeah, so we have only Surface laptops or Surface books. So unlocking it, of course, but this is so convenient. You open up your laptop, boom, you're logged in. But it's funny you say the discussion with customers, because I have currently the same one with one of them. They use a third-party product as well for MFA, for Windows Unlock. And we talked about Windows Hello for Business. Microsoft says it's multi-factor authentication because it's a trusted device and a trusted PIN. But everybody knows it's not the same, of course. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper into the requirements of the customers, that's where it gets interesting. That customer was saying to me, well, we have users writing their passwords on a Post-it and just putting onto the device. That's why we need MFA. I think you have a people problem at this time, not an IT problem.
Yeah, good point. There's so many things in security that really do just resolve into having that communication with your user and explaining to them right from wrong, I guess. I do see some interesting discussions insofar as a lot of IT folks, they freak out when they hear about people writing down passwords. But last time I checked, the password book that's in the drawer at my desk, that's maybe a bit more secure than some of the passwords that I'm maybe storing in places that might be more susceptible to being hacked by someone sitting at their computer. So that was I've seen that coming up on Twitter. I think it was Brian in Pittsburgh was kind of posting about stuff like that, and that got me thinking as far as there's perceived risk and then real world risk. And so I'm rambling, but I guess if I'll switch gears quickly here. And one of the things I also want to talk to you about was I've seen that you were recently awarded an award called the Microsoft Product Influencer. That's quite interesting to me insofar as it's not something I've seen much of. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what that involved?
Yeah, so this was for the Azure Security Private Preview Program. So you have a lot of private preview programs run Microsoft or customer connections programs. They're essentially the same, where customers are brought in to provide feedback into early private preview designs, and really can work with Microsoft to create those products and provide direct feedback as development is being done. So across you have Microsoft Threat Protection Customer Connection Program. You have the Intune Customer Connection Program, and then for me it was the Azure Security Private Preview Program, and in particular, of course, for Azure Sentinel. So within that private preview program, they host a lot of different private previews. I think they currently have 15, if I'm not mistaken. Each day, feedback is being asked, and you can provide feedback and features you want to see or do not want to see. And so with this award, you're awarded for being active with the product team and providing feedback as features are being developed. And this is something I just love about Microsoft, is how open they have become. I speak with I think for you the same, probably you speak with so many people from Microsoft, from the product team. It can be under NDA as an MVP, as a partner, as a customer, but even on Twitter, if you tweet Alex Simmons, which is the director of identity for Microsoft, if you tweet him now, he will probably respond, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I think I love working with Microsoft and helping them go into the right direction. I don't take credit for anything because they have the right vision, in my opinion. But I love helping with them and pointing out small things and small improvements that they might have forgotten about, which are implemented into the product. And it's really awesome to see something, for example, the automation rules within Azure Sentinel. It's a way to kick off certain Azure Logic apps when certain things within Sentinel happen. I have been working with the product team on that since before it was a private preview. So really at the start. And then seeing it being developed throughout the different life cycles of that feature into public preview is really amazing.
And Microsoft is so open to that sort of feedback from all members of the community and MVPs and all sorts of people. So, and they listen and they want honest, open feedback. They want it to be quite brutal at times. If they've not got something right, they need to know this, and who better to tell them that they're not quite on the mark with a particular feature. It's very refreshing. Very refreshing. They ask us as MVPs to be quite brutal, which is I find it quite hard. It's not something that comes naturally to me, I must admit. But that's the way they want it to be. But moving on to your, you mentioned your MVP award. I believe we were awarded the MVP award in January this year. Is that right?
Yes, correct. So not that long ago, actually.
Yeah, fantastic, and many congratulations to you on that. Thank you. Well deserved. And I would think you're probably going to be one of the youngest MVPs. I would imagine. Did you know if that's true or not? Or
I don't know currently. I know the youngest MVP previously, I looked it up, was 18 years old. So that's really amazing. Yeah. I think it was a student at the time. I don't know about the current ages but I do see I'm one of the youngest. When I talk to people and I say I'm 24 years old, they're like, "Wow, I could be your father," which is funny to receive a response. Like that.
I certainly could. Because I'm 49 almost. But no, it's absolutely amazing. I applaud you. More power to you, Thijs, indeed, because it's a very prestigious award to get, and certainly at your age. How did you find the process of getting nominated and going through? And did you find any barriers due to your age or anything like that, or was it not a problem at all?
For me personally, I had a difficult time accepting it. You talked about in this podcast also about the imposter syndrome. This was really the case for me as well, because now you're talking with people inside of the same group as people who have been working with SCCM for 20 years. I have barely touched SCCM myself. which is weird sometimes, and I feel weird about it also. And one thing I had difficulty as well with is I talked about Michael van Horenbeek before. He's my boss, but also my mentor. He put me inside of the Microsoft 365 Security book. He also nominated me for MVP. But I had some difficulties accepting that it wasn't because he nominated me, I received the award. It's because the things I had done that I received it. Because sometimes it's difficult to accept, I think, for myself as well, what I have accomplished in those short years and where I stand now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that imposter syndrome, I can tell you, unfortunately, that never goes away. I mean, as I said, I'm 49 and I still have it. I'm still, well, I don't deserve this. It's I don't compare to all these legends who have been MVPs for years, like my good friend now Steve Goodman and people like Tony Redmond and our last guest, Andy Malone, who we had on the show last week, 14-time MVP. So, but amazing. It's everybody who puts their effort into this and gives back to the community in their own way, no matter what they do, does deserve it. And it's hard to accept that at times, I find. And it all comes down to, my wife has a saying, I'm not sure, well, she probably heard it somewhere else, I'm sure, but comparison is the thief of joy. And it's so true. It really is. You can't compare yourself to others. You've got to look to yourself, look to your own journey, what you can contribute. And if you compare yourself to others, and you will get the imposter syndrome. So try not to is what I try and do. I don't always succeed. The grass is always greener and all that, but
yeah, you're right. It is something that we talk about a fair bit on this show because it is so common, and like Pete says, it kind of doesn't go away. But the one thing, and you mentioned how you found it hard to kind of accept that it was happening, insofar as in such a few years you'd achieved that. But the one thing I think about is, I think that in the IT landscape that we live in just now, where if you work for a Microsoft partner anyway, it's reasonably easy to get your hands on demos, play about with stuff, set up test tenants and play about with it. I don't want to say it's easy to become an expert in anything now, because number one, what really does expert mean? But number two, because it requires a lot of dedication. But I do think that if you put the work in, it is quite easy to very quickly upskill in things. And all it takes is for you to be running faster than the guy beside you, for you to appear that you're, and really do become better than them. So I find it interesting that you mentioned how it seemed to happen quite fast for you. You know what I mean? But I guess what I'm trying to say is, don't take that as anything other than a good sign, because it shows that you're hitting the ground running and you're constantly going and working on that book. My God, the amount of information that you must just learn on a daily basis, you know, from everyone, all your co-authors and things like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, and indeed, and it's something I love as well. And like you said, everything is evolving so fast, but also some of the aspects within Microsoft are also so young. For example, Azure Sentinel is only 2 years old.
Great point.
You don't have to be an expert. Okay, if you have experience in a SIEM, that's a big advantage. But it doesn't help you in being knowledgeable about Azure Sentinel. And I think this is also where young guys come into the game and shouldn't be afraid to show their expertise also within the community. Maybe people are often afraid because they're saying that's a young snob. He doesn't know anything about the real world. He just knows about the cloud. He doesn't know anything else. But that's a huge point, in my opinion, is if you put the work in, like you said, and with a new product, it's something you can do and achievable.
And the thing that community members and MVPs alike all have in common, I find, is the passion and for the products that they are particularly interested in within M365 or Azure. So that's key to it. But you know, everyone has something to offer. Everyone has a place. This community is so welcoming and lifts people up. but it doesn't go away, that imposter syndrome. I mean, you mentioned the thought of being who's going to listen to me as this youngster coming into this. I have that on the opposite side of the scale now. I'm sort of starting very conscious of my age. So all these young guns coming up behind me, am I going to be able to keep up with them? And or are people still going to hire me for good jobs at this age? And but if your passion is there, if the hard work you put into it is there, and you have a good mindset, those sort of things combined, I have found, touch wood, that you'll be rewarded. People will like you and appreciate you, and good things will come. So I would say fantastic, more power to you. Keep doing what you're doing, and you're amazing, my friend. I think you're a very, very welcome member of the MVP community. Have you one nice thing about being an MVP, actually, one perk that you do have is that you can nominate other people for the program. Have you done that yourself yet? Have you made any nominations?
Not yet, no. Because that's, I think, where the imposter syndrome comes in as well. Why shouldn't somebody who's MVP for only 6 months decide who's going to be an MVP next? So I don't think I'm confident yet at this point to nominate somebody else.
Yeah, I get that, because I've nominated about 4 people now, and I was awarded in October 2020, and this MVPs are awarded on the 1st of every month, and my first successful nominee happened this month. A really nice guy in Sweden called Christian van Bergstrom, who I think listens to the show. So hey, Christian, many congratulations, and richly deserved. But that to me, I got more of a buzz out of that on the 1st of June than when I was awarded myself. I was like, yes, awesome. seeing someone so deserving, put in so much hard work, getting the reward. So I would say, if you think there's someone out there in the community who deserves it, you've earned that privilege, and pay it forward. Very much so. Go out and nominate them, mentor them, pass on what you've learned, and that's the way it should work, for me anyway. Anyway, I'll get off my preaching platform now.
Your pulpit. So
yeah,
I guess,
that's the word.
Yeah, so I would be remiss not to conclude today's episode with the most important question in the Microsoft tech community. Here it goes: Terminator 1 or Terminator 2? And like I say on every episode, this determines whether or not you get to be a recurring guest or not.
I think I will fill this one. I'm gonna. Yeah, I haven't seen either of them.
Okay.
That's gonna be painful. No, I have not seen either of the Terminators before.
Yes. Well, based on that, you can't pick then, can you, really?
Yeah, that's a win for 2. That's a win for 2.
No, I think we have to void that one. But this is something we can do on the show as well. We can suggest movies to people. I would say, well, go ahead and watch them if you ever have the time, and see what you think of them, and then come back and tell us, because Rue did that, and Rudy Ooms, one of our previous guests, did that for me with The Big Lebowski, which I'd never seen, and I went off and watched that, and absolutely loved it. And I love movies. I put a little tweet out there today, which I've tagged you in, actually, Rue, about at the moment my top 10 favorite movies, if you ask me right now, are this, and this. And it's so subjective, because on any given day that could be different. But I'll be interested to see. I know Rudy's replied to that one already, but because he's a massive movie buff. But are movies something you enjoy, Tess, or not particularly your thing?
I just finished the Lord of the Rings with my girlfriend. She hadn't seen them before.
Awesome.
We just finished the last one, the last Return of the King's Extended Edition. Nice. So we just came out of a 4-hour marathon before the podcast to this one. In general, I'm more of a series guy, I think. So currently, like, for example, watching Lucifer on Netflix and Shadow and Bone,
cool,
which I really enjoy. Because I think for me, series is something I like to watch during the week, because it's something you can follow up on, and then a movie in the weekend at night, where you can really enjoy the length of the movie.
For sure, I totally agree with that. And Rue and I, obviously, do you like Lord of the Rings, Rue? Because we are obviously we're both quite wizardy looking, aren't we?
That's the goal. That's the intention. Yep. Try to look like
yeah.
a Lord of the Rings character. Yeah, that's.
It was amazing because my girlfriend, so we first did The Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings. And she said, The Hobbit is so much better than Lord of the Rings.
Ooh.
And I know so many people will hate her for that. But it's an interesting topic because she had first seen The Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And then the Lord of the Rings seems like so lengthy movies where there's so much time between some of the things. I love it for also the memes you see in those and the references and the funny moments.
Yeah.
I love it, but from an outsider, it's an interesting perspective in some of these things.
Yeah, I have strong opinions about Lord of the Rings versus The Hobbit. That's for another day. I won't get into that.
And there are lots of memes and outtakes as well. Probably the most famous one is where Viggo Mortensen, he actually broke his foot kicking the helmet of the orc, didn't he?
Right.
So in the beginning of the Two Towers. So there's lots of
as a geek for me, it was like my girlfriend. I was saying, look, he broke his toe.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
And then there's the one with Sean Bean, where it's overused so much. One does not simply do this, walk into Modo. So many good ones. So many good ones. But Thijs, this has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, and it was such a great conversation. We're over the hour mark, which I think is the first time this has happened. So we've obviously enjoyed our chat with you today. Before we finish off, is there anything else you'd like to say? And can you let us know how people can connect with you online if they'd like to get in touch?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm active on Twitter mostly. So it's just Thijs Lecomte. Probably better link that in the show notes because nobody will be able to type it. But of course, also on LinkedIn and on my blog, 365 by Thijs. But be sure to keep an eye on Twitter for also the updates about the book, when they're going to release a new book with the Azure Sentinel chapter included. But I really want to thank you for having me. I had a blast. This hour just flew past. It was really fun. So thank you for letting me be a guest in this show.
For sure, absolutely. And we will, Terminator aside, we will definitely have you back on at some point. Talk about more about the book and Sentinel and all that good stuff. Okay, definitely. Right. Yes, we'll sign out of episode 11. Thanks, everyone. Pete, Tej, thanks for your time.
Thanks all. See you soon. Catch you down the road. Bye.